Welcome back to Reddit Aliens, everyone. I'm John. Hello. Today we're going to be taking a look at a slightly off-putting topic, but an important one. What's the most gory, effed up stuff you've ever seen? Not safe for work. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Driving through Delta State in Nigeria, and our escort coolly explaining that was the burnt and desiccated remains of most likely a thief who was caught and then stuck inside a tractor tire, doused in petrol and set alight in the central reservation of the main void, had been in the country about 6 hours at this point. I was at the hospital waiting in a shared room at night, like 0200, because I had food poisoning. There was a car accident at the highway. There was a lot of screams. I looked to the closer screaming voice, and like a jump scare in a horror movie, there was a lady screaming, bathed in blood, crying. She had glass cuts all over her arms, and some glass was still sticking to her. There were other people with broken bones sticking out of their legs, a lot of blood and ugly crying. I closed my eyes and pretended I wasn't there. It was a nightmare. I still panic when I see blood. I laugh at myself whenever I remember I wanted to be a nurse. Some old lady walked in front of a speeding bus. I didn't see how it happened because I was just looking out of the window, but I heard the crash and felt the panic breaking. Then saw her halfway in through the bus's front window. I don't even know how that's possible, but there she was. And you couldn't really tell if she was she or what the bloody mess was. Only learned the details from the news. And the most effed up part was that when people got off the bus and had to wait for the cops and another bus to come pick them up, they were mostly angry about going to be late. I mean, it didn't shock me, but it was pretty brutal to see both the totally mangled corpse and how little people actually cared. The idea of the image of an elderly woman mangled by a bus is horrible. However, that desensitization and self-centeredness of the people around it's even more heartbreaking. I was driving my rig down the interstate and saw a guy commit suicide by jumping off an overpass and getting creamed by another tractor trailer. All I saw when it happened was like a red cloud of mist and what I think was a piece of his torso bounce off the side of the road. I immediately pulled over to check on the driver of the tractor trailer and got a too close for me look at the front of his truck and everything that was stuck, smeared all over it. A guy on a bike tried skipping a red light when everyone else, including my dad and I, were waiting. He got hit by a truck, and there was so much blood everywhere, along with his organs, my dad covered my eyes after a few seconds. Seen a guy get struck by lightning carrying a case of beer home from the gas station. Was about 20 yards from him. I was young. Most vivid memories were sound of the lightning crack, his shoes smoking, and first responders body bagging. In prison, we had a pedophile come in and was acting out of line and showing off. People got papers on him, and he raped his 14-year-old neighbor. Some guy took it upon himself to put the guy in his place and smashed his head off a dorm heater until the teeth through his lips and ripped his cheek open, exposing his mouth and shit. There was blood everywhere. It was effing nuts. A few years later in work release, I also saw someone who was storing up their meds, OD and die, spewing pink foam all over their chest as they convulsed. The worst part is when I got out for work, the dude's wife was asking where he was while the ambulance was wheeling them out on a stretcher. He was covered, so she couldn't see it was him. It was so effing messed up. She was just screaming at us to tell her where he was, and she already knew. When I was working a previous retail job, I saw a car speed into our parking lot while I was sitting outside on break. The woman driving gets out screaming, pulling her child from the back seat covered in blood. Turns out her boyfriend has shot her 3-year-old son. She was on the phone with 911 while driving to the hospital, and they told her to stop at the nearest place for the ambulance to meet her. The kid sadly didn't make it. Best I got involves me personally. Was walking with my mom and sibling carrying home bags of stuff we just bought. Crossed the street with a green walk light. Car on our right ran right into the three of us through the red light, only slammed on the brakes immediately after hitting us. I actually thought it was my dad's car when I initially saw it coming from the distance. And speaking of which, we were lucky that not only was it a small car, but that there weren't any other cars running the green light. because we got thrown into the intersection. I remember the feeling of the impact, bouncing on the ground and the sensation of sliding and rolling for a few seconds with my eyes instinctively shut the whole time. I kinda just found myself immediately standing up though. Saw my mom laying on her back further into the intersection than me, walked over to her to find her with her eyes open but unresponsive. Sibling was off to the side screaming. Saw that he was holding his ankles but seemed like the rest of him was okay. After that, I saw that there was a dent in her windshield where my head hit it, but I didn't really think about it at the time. I opened the driver door to check on her. She was almost completely incoherent. I tried getting her to calm down and pull out her phone, although I wasn't thinking very clearly at that point. At this point, the guy who had been parked on the other side of the red light stopped me and had me sit in the passenger seat, and also gave me tissues and told me to hold them over my ear. Turns out my ear was sliced open at the top and had been bleeding the whole time, and had bits of glass stuck in my ear and hair. Took a few minutes to stop bleeding before ambulance got there. My mom had a near-death experience, but came out alive with a broken collarbone, concussion, and brain injury. Brother had nearly shattered feet and ankles. The wheel drove over them, and all I had was a sliced ear and some scrapes. On a funny note though, I came right out of my shoes, and they stayed exactly where they had been on impact, and I didn't even realize I was in socks until I was in the ambulance truck. Came across a lady who crashed her moped into a guardrail at about 70 miles per hour. My friend and I were the first to come across her. We thought she was dead when we approached her since we could see brain bits coming out of her skull. She then started to involuntarily breathe like someone does when they're knocked out. You don't forget that sound when you aren't expecting a person to be alive. Car crash. Family in a car. 4 guys in the other. The 4 people were dead on impact. No seatbelts. While the dad in the other car died in front of me and my friend while we were calling an ambulance. Crooked limbs, eerie noises, and blood everywhere. I couldn't drive home, so a cop did, with his colleague followed with their car. He dropped my friend at his place, then brought me home, parked my car, and made sure I was okay. I'm an EMT, so I've seen a lot, but this takes the cake. An elderly man who lived on remote property with almost no family died in his car in early spring. It took months for a wellness check, and we were called to transport the body at the coroner's office was busy at the moment. It was mid-August and close to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 32 Celsius. We had to scrape him from the windows into bio-waste bags, and his bones were rotting. The smell was the worst thing I've ever smelled. Funeral director here. Had a family pushing really badly to see their husband or dad after a car accident, but didn't know what state he was in. I told them I couldn't give them an answer until I saw him. Drove up to the coroner's to collect him and signed off for 4 body bags. Not a great start. I then opened the main bag, which was holding his torso and head, but only found a pile of mush and an eyeball. Had to tell the family there was nothing to view. Unfortunately, I've seen some pretty awful things. Here's one of them. I came up in a car accident. I almost always stop to help if it looks like it's needed. There was a smaller truck that hit a larger truck at an intersection. I found the driver of the smaller truck wandering around on the side of the road, obviously in shock. I waited with him while we called 911 and helped him call his wife on my phone. Part of his eye was hanging out of the socket, and he had a nasty head wound from hitting the windshield. When he handed my phone back to me, it was covered in blood. A few weeks later, I got a call from him, thanking me for stopping and helping him. I saw a new line cook stand on the fryer to clean the vents instead of using a stepladder and slip into 400 degree Fahrenheit oil feet first. By the time I ran around the pass, he was white with shock, as he had tried to take one of his oil-soaked socks off and all the skin came with it, exposing the flesh underneath. He was rushed to a hospital and survived, but had to have several skin grafts and was unable to walk for 6 months. I can't forget the look on his pant-fused leg skin blistering and flaking off, and his degloved ankle. Not me, but my grandma. I never wanted to ask her about it, but apparently she told my mother a long time ago. When my grandma was around the ages of 10 to 11, she heard arguing from outside of her house. When she went downstairs to investigate, she saw her mother and father arguing. Her father stormed into the house angry as could be and went into his bedroom. About 10 seconds later, he walked out with a double-barreled shotgun. He kicked the door open and shot his wife in the head, turned to look at my grandmother, and then shot himself. She was only 10 or 11 years old, and just saw her father kill her mother then commit suicide. After this, she became a schizophrenic, and her medicine of choice was alcohol. She would yell at the walls and sometimes cry, asking her father why he did it. I always thought my grandma was just crazy. I can't imagine the pain she felt. There's probably some old wisdom around something like this that says something along the lines of, try to be kind to everyone because you don't know what they're going through or have gone through. Good example. There was a really bad stench in my apartment complex for an entire day. All of the neighbors assumed it was the garbage disposal area in the corridor and someone had dumped particularly stinky garbage. The next day the police came because the apartment right in front of mine had 3 decomposing dead bodies. It's assumed one of the guys shot his brother, and the guest who was there and then shot himself. The bodies had been swollen beyond recognition since it was the middle of July and their electricity had been cut the day they died inside the apartment. The apartment complex had a time that if you didn't pay rent for 3 months, they would cut off your electricity. Had the electricity not been cut, the AC would keep running, and the bodies wouldn't be discovered for at least a week more. I wasn't going to leave my apartment that day, but I had an important appointment. The second I opened my door, there were 3 dead bodies in front of me. Traumatizing. I might be too late for this to get noticed, but here it goes. I was a teacher's aide for kindergarten way back in the day. There was a girl that we will call T. T was always really nice and always wanted to help her desk buddies. So one day, when she went to sharpen her pencil, she asked the desk buddies if they wanted theirs sharpened too. They all agreed, and she gleefully walked to the sharpener and sharpened all 4 of the pencils. On the way back to her desk, she was carrying 2 pencils per hand while making a fist, pencil tips pointing up. Somehow she trips. When she falls, she goes to stop the fall by planting both fists in the ground, pencil tips still pointing up. Her face fell right on top of her fists. All I remember is hearing her screaming, pushing herself up so she isn't laying on the floor, and when she's able to look up, she has 2 pencils stuck in her eye. Panic breaks out amongst the students. I call 911 while the teacher is trying to calm everyone down and get them away from the student. I will never get over the first image of seeing the pencils in her eyes, then the girl crying or screaming the entire time we wait for the ambulance to arrive, about 5 minutes. For a nice update, girl returned to school about 2 weeks later wearing an eye patch, but was also told by the doctor that she wouldn't lose any eyesight. From everything I've heard, she grew up just fine. A man run over, like still under the car, made me understand people who forget trauma and loathe people who think how you could forget that. I don't remember much except a flash of crying screams from the driver. I was on a skiing holiday, and a girl was going full speed to the bottom of the hill. She couldn't slow down at the end, so she smashed dead center into a corner of a building next to the gondola, probably for equipment and stuff. Her helmet broke and her brains splattered on both sides of the corner, dead on the spot, right in front of my eyes. Helicopter came, but she was long dead already. A semi hit a large buck on the interstate. I saw the semi first, with a huge dent in the grill. The deer basically exploded, and chunks of it were in 4 or 5 of the lanes. The head and antlers were intact with one shoulder and leg attached. When I was in high school, my girlfriend at the time slit both of her wrists in my bathroom. She then ran out of my bathroom screaming, and I wasn't sure what was going on until I looked in the bathroom and saw so much blood. She started flailing around in a panic after she slit her wrists and managed to get blood everywhere. It seriously looked like a crime scene. I wrapped her wrists up and put her in my car. I've never driven so effing fast anywhere in my entire life than when I drove her to the hospital that night. She lived, and as far as I know, she's still alive and happily married these days. Watched a man get pulled out of water at a marina in Myrtle Beach. His family had pulled into the docks and his wife was screaming that he fell and never came up. The police were called and they went and found him. Took close to 3 hours. He was long dead. I've never seen anything more depressing than his wife being unable to stand or stop crying. Shit rocked me a little. I was once driving to work. I had just hit the freeway and I happened to pass a car accident where a dude blasted like 50 mph plus through a fence into a small ditch. This was right as EMS was arriving, so there wasn't any cleanup. and you could see his body clear as day. Right arm ripped off from the elbow up, blood everywhere. Hasn't left me. I used to clean up homicide, murder, suicide scenes. Some were national headlines. I've held skull and brain matter in large amounts. After about a year, the last job effed me up over mentally. For starters, I was solo, and that's a big no-no for a variety of reasons. It was a very public place, and the space I was cleaning was a large room, and the family tried entering. Police were on scene and handled them, but later that night, a bunch of friends called to say they saw me on TV on the news. Without getting into details, it was worse than any horror movie I've seen. When I turned on the UV blood lights, the room lit up like Vegas. Oh yeah. And what you don't get from TV and movies is the smell, and I'll leave it at that. My mother, dead. First glance, her right side was revealed bare skin, not nudity, just her right side from armpit to thigh, and I thought she was alive, until they opened a door to a small room and my father, who was inside, said, "It's too late, she's gone." Once I got to see her, she died at 49, I was shocked at how much her eyes had puffed out. Her mouth was hanging open. Man jumped from 8 floors up into a busy atrium cafe area during lunch. He landed behind me, but I didn't know what had happened at first. I just heard a small explosion, looked around and saw a cloud of dust and debris and a man lying on the floor. I rushed to help him. The explosion noise was his skull cracking open. When I bent down to see what had happened, I got a close-up view of his still pulsating brain. Shooting at a party. Small town, so a lot of people knew everyone there. A fight broke out, and I stood about 5 to 10 feet away from a guy who pulled his gun, looked me dead in my eyes as he cocked it, and turned to shoot in the other direction. One person was killed. My buddy's sister was hit in the back of the head but lived. Needless to say, partying died down a lot after that. Not me, but my wife likes to remind me that during her times in forensics, she once had to scoop, yes, scoop, like with a measuring cup they found in her kitchen, an extremely obese elderly lady that lived alone out of her bathtub into containers for evidence. Apparently she lived alone and got stuck in the tub. Unable to get out or move to drain the water, she slowly died. Of course, this was during the summer. No one that lived near her knew anything until they smelt it. She essentially melted from the combination of moisture and heat. Add moisture, humidity, and decomposing organic matter, and that's going to be some gross soup.